What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today I've got some fantasy football rankings for you guys for NFL Week 9 action. Today I've got my quarterbacks and my wide receivers. Last week I crammed all positions into one video, and it just got to be a bit much. So this week, splitting them up to quarterbacks and wide receivers in one video, and the next video will be running backs and tight ends. So stay tuned for that video tomorrow. And before I get into things today, make sure each and every single one of you guys has gone down and hit the subscribe button to my channel, as well as turn that bell on so you guys are notified whenever I come out with a new episode. By doing that, you guys are helping me help you guys out in return, because if I reach my goal of attaining 1,000 subscribers by the start of the new year 2021, I'm going to be giving away 10 draft guides on the channel completely free to my subscribers, just for all the support you guys have been giving me over the past few months. I really appreciate each and every single one of you guys here on the channel. Let's help each other out, hit the intro, and get into the rankings. Like I mentioned in the intro last week, I crammed all 4 of the major fantasy starting positions into one video, and it was just a big handful of things to go over in one episode. So I decided to split things up, and last week I only did my top 12 quarterbacks in that list. But since I cut the video into 2 segments this week, I decided to go over my top 15 quarterback plays. But after I prepped this video, Matthew Stafford, the Lions quarterback, was added to the COVID reserve list, and he was my number 11 quarterback for this week. So I'm just going to cut him out of this video and not go over him. He was a guy I was pretty high on this week. But everyone moves up a spot with Stafford being removed. The guy I would probably have penciled in as my number 15 quarterback without Stafford is Drew Brees, but I don't really want to go over him because he's not a guy I'm optimistic about starting this week. The Bucs defense is very good, so he's just not a player I would look to start. I think a lot of turnovers and not many big plays for the Saints offense this week, so just a quick 30-second synopsis of why I don't want Drew Brees in my lineups this week. But into Derek Carr here, nothing particularly special about Carr this week. He's just got a semi-decent matchup against the Chargers, who allowed Drew Lock to toss 3 touchdowns against them last week. This is just a very efficient Raiders offense. They don't turn the football over often. A run-first team, but I think Derek Carr has the opportunity for some big plays and a few scores against LA. The Chargers obviously just traded away Desmond King at the trade deadline to Tennessee, so I think that opens things up a bit as well, and that secondary that was very talented coming into this season. Derek Carr, my number 14 quarterback this week, and a guy that I think has some stream value. Into my number 13 quarterback this week, I have Cam Newton, the Patriots starter. And Cam Newton's a guy who has really struggled since he came back from his COVID case. He has not thrown a passing touchdown since returning to action. But I think Cam Newton gets back on the board this week. He's going to throw a passing touchdown against the Jets this week. The Jets just don't do anything well on the football field. They are really bad offensively and not too solid defensively. I think ultimately the Jets offense is what's going to give Cam Newton the most opportunities. I think they're going to stall out drives and have to punt the football so many times and have so many 3-and-outs that Cam Newton in that Pats offense, which is not very dynamic or explosive, is just going to have so many cracks at scoring the football. I think that eventually they're just going to get in over and over again. So I think between 3 and 4 total touchdowns for Cam Newton on the day. I would expect maybe 2 through the air and 2 on the ground for Newton, and what will be a very solid performance for him. Newton's definitely a guy I'm selling high on the rest of the season. I think right now is a prime opportunity too. He had a nice output last week despite having some turnovers, and I think a strong outing this week can increase the value for him on the trading market as the deadline approaches. So make sure to sell Cam Newton after this week. I think that's a very good move for your fantasy teams. As a Green Bay Packer fan, this one really stings, but in 12-team leagues, Aaron Rodgers is my least favorable starting quarterback for Week 9. I think against the 49ers, Aaron Rodgers has just struggled in his career. Obviously, he's had some playoff exits against them last season, absolutely demolished by San Fran twice. And this is not the same 49ers team that did that to him last year, but it's still a very solid unit despite injuries to Richard Sherman, Solomon Thomas, and Nick Bosa. This is still a very good group. Jason Verrett has been playing very good football. He's been playing very good coverage on number 1 wide receivers this season. And I think that Aaron Rodgers just struggles against this team. The 49ers are actually Aaron Rodgers' childhood favorite team that he rooted for, but he's really struggled against them in his career. So Aaron Rodgers, not a guy I'm optimistic about starting this week. he is still a guy you got to put in your starting lineups. I think he still has a nice floor, but the ceiling this week is definitely not there. San Francisco is not going to let Aaron Rodgers toss the ball all over them and have a massive fancy outing. So Aaron Rodgers, a nice floor play this week, but he's not a guy to expect to take over and win your week for you. I went back and forth with Rodgers and Tannehill at this number 11 spot here. I tried to keep my bias for the Green Bay Packers aside in this decision, and I think that ultimately helped me pick Tannehill here. Ryan Tannehill has another difficult matchup against Chicago this week, but it's nothing that the Tennessee Titans can't overcome. The Titans are one of the highest scoring teams this year, and they can get it done on the ground and through the air. Ryan Tannehill has been extremely productive and efficient, and he's able to run the football as well and get you some points that way. So Ryan Tannehill at QB 11, again, not a guy with crazy upside this week, but you know you can depend on him. Like I said, Ryan Tannehill is not going to go out there and put up week-winning numbers, but he's a guy you can depend on to hold the fort down and put up solid enough numbers and let your other players take over. At the number 10 spot this week, we've got Matt Ryan, another guy similar to the last two, who has a capped upside this week. His ceiling is a little bit lower than on some other games because of how good the Broncos are defensively, but a very reliable starter and a guy with a safe floor because of how loaded that Falcons offense is at wide receiver and tight end. So I think Matt Ryan puts up nice numbers against the Broncos this week, but Vic Fangio, a very good D coordinator and defensive head coach for the Broncos, and I think that ultimately he is going to prevent Matt Ryan from having a ridiculous outing, but I think Matt Ryan will get his numbers and produce as well. For the second straight week, I believe Lamar Jackson is my QB9 and low on my list, and that's simply because of matchup. Lamar Jackson remains relevant in these tough matchups because of his rushing game and the work he does on the ground. How many points he gets there for you is invaluable to your teams, and it really saves him against teams that are very good in the secondary and prevent him from throwing the football well. But Lamar Jackson against the Colts, I think, is in for another rough week. Last week, he struggled against the Steelers and turned the football over multiple times, so I think there's a little bit of a similar factor going to be in play this week. But Lamar Jackson, that rushing value keeps him a starter for me in all leagues this week, and I think he's a guy who is ultimately going to be held back a little bit, but still put up starting level numbers. Justin Herbert at QB8 is a guy I really like this week. He's been exceptional at throwing the ball down the field, and Keenan Allen and Mike Williams have really found themselves this year in that Chargers offense under Justin Herbert. So I think he's a guy that produces very nice fantasy outputs for multiple players in that offense around him, including himself. So Justin Herbert, with that deep ball ability and that rushing value he has, is a very startable quarterback the rest of the season. Even as a rookie, he's a guy I look to depend on in some lineups this week. So Justin Herbert can definitely be trusted against the Vegas secondary that isn't too sturdy. They let up some big plays, and I think Justin Herbert will get what he wants over the top, so definitely a play for me this week. I think one of the most under-the-radar starts this week is Ben Roethlisberger, the Steelers starting quarterback against the Dallas Cowboys. I think Ben Roethlisberger is getting too much hate in fantasy this year. He was actually a buy low guy for me this week. I think that he's going to put up really nice numbers against the Cowboys this week. And the last 2 weeks, he's had troublesome matchups. He's turned the football over too many times. He had a couple against Philly, and he struggled last week against the Ravens defense that is very solid, and they play very tough in those divisional rivalry games. So Big Ben, definitely a guy I like going forward. He's one of my favorite guys to go out and trade for if you're a QB-needy team. I definitely think he's a guy that can produce for you, and especially this week with all those weapons he has offensively, they're in store for a big game in Pittsburgh against the Cowboys. At QB6 this week, we're getting into guys here who have real upside this week and guys who can go out and win your week for you. So Tom Brady this week is kind of having that Infinity Gauntlet moment here. You guys saw it in the thumbnail. He's got the last Infinity Stone to place on the glove, and this week Antonio Brown is really the cherry on top for that Bucs offense. Everything's coming together in Tampa, and Tom Brady just has so many weapons to get the football to. There's just too much to like about the Bucs offense not to rank him highly every week from this point going forward. New Orleans defense just hasn't been good this season, and they've let out big plays over the top to almost every opponent they've played this season. And Tom Brady with Antonio Brown, I think, is just going to be an electric combination. Those guys played one game together against Miami last season, and I think they ended up putting up a stat line of 4 for 62 and a touchdown. So they show that they can get the job done. Those guys already have a pre-established connection all the way back to their college days, and I think they're going to pick up where they left off last year and just be very good and dynamic, even in a reduced snap count for Brown. Bruce Arians said anywhere between 10 and 35 snaps for AB this week, but I really don't think it matters. Between Mike Evans, Gronk, Chris Godwin, Fournette and Rojo out of the backfield, and AB, there's too many guys to get the football to. Tom Brady has too many options, and he literally, I said this in the offseason, he just has to be an elite ball distributor. He doesn't even have to make the big play. I think it's going to be there, and I think he can still do it. I think he can definitely still get it done and has the talent and arm strength to throw the ball down the field. But Tom Brady just has to be a ball distributor. That's all he has to do in this offense. Those guys are so good and can do it themselves. He just has to get the football in space and make plays. Brady has such a high touchdown ceiling every week because of all the guys in this offense that he can turn the football over a time or two and still have elite numbers. I think there's too many things to like about the Tampa offense and Tom Brady to be ignorant and talk about the age and whatnot and not play him. Don't be cute. Go start Tom Brady this week. He's finally realizing that top-tier potential that he had coming into this season, and a lot of people bailed on him early when the numbers weren't there. But you guys had to have expected that. He was moving into an entirely new offense after 20-plus years in New England. I think he's going to have some really big games the rest of the year. And come playoff time, when the games really count, I think he's going to deliver big time and put up really, really crucial numbers for your teams. Kyler Murray gets my number 5 spot this week. Him and D-Hop have just been so insane this season. Those guys have been almost unstoppable. DeAndre Hopkins has the most yards per game in the NFL this year, just outpacing Davante Adams. But Kyler, with that rushing value he's got, the guy is almost untouchable in space. He is so shifty. I think Kyler just has a really high upside against Miami this week. And I think against an inexperienced quarterback in Tua, Kyler's got the opportunity to just run up the score here, get ahead early, and make Tua play catch-up, turn the football over, and give Kyler a lot of extra opportunities at scoring. So Kyler Murray, he's a must-start every week due to the talent and the guys around him. But this week especially, a very favorable matchup, and Kyler Murray is a guy I really like this week. Patrick Mahomes is normally a perennial top 1 or 2 ranked quarterback for me coming into a week, but the Carolina Panthers are sneaky good against the pass this season, and their top corner, Diontae Johnson, has a handful of picks. So I think that that's a group that could take the football away from Mahomes a couple times if he gets careless with it, but I still obviously love Mahomes this week. He's going to put up his numbers. His ceiling is just a little bit lower than normal. So Mahomes is still high on the list this week, but not quite as high if he had an average or favorable matchup. This week, I love Josh Allen in fantasy. He is going to have a huge game against the Seattle Seahawks. Josh Allen has the perfect recipe for success this week, and that is just chuck it to Stefon Diggs over and over again. Stefon Diggs is going to have a monster outing. I'll get into him later, but Josh Allen, I cannot get enough of this guy in my starting lineup. If you guys own Josh Allen, please start him this week. He's going to put up huge numbers. He might throw a pick or two because he's trying to sling the football way down the field, but there's so much things to like here. Josh Allen is going to force the defense to sit back and play over the top on Stefon Diggs once that connection gets going, and then Cole Beasley underneath is just going to be wide open and have so many man beaters that it's going to be crazy. Josh Allen needs to be in lineups this week. Even though he's been struggling recently, he is a must-start player this week. And Josh Allen will win fantasy matchups in Week 9. He's going to return a lot of value for you guys, so you got to start him. My QB2 for this week is Deshaun Watson, who has a very favorable matchup against the Jags this week. And Jacksonville has just not been sound on the secondary this season. They just have a lot of young moving parts on that team, and they just need to develop. So they're not ready to lock guys down yet. They let up big plays, and they have lots of lapses in coverage. So Deshaun Watson, with that rushing value, especially with the Jags starting a rookie quarterback who's never started a game before, I think Deshaun Watson and the Texans are going to have plenty of opportunities at possessing the football this week. They're going to have a lot of chances to score, and so I think Deshaun Watson has a massive ceiling in Week 9. It's just been hard to pick against Russell Wilson this season, and for that reason is my quarterback 1 in Week 9. There's just so many things to like about Russell this year and not very many things going against him. He's got the elite wide receiver combo of Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. He's got some rushing value in there as well. They can run the football. They're so dynamic. Seattle is very, very good offensively this year, and there's just so much to like I said. The Buffalo Bills are obviously a respectable opponent for the Seahawks this week, and Russell has got his work cut out for him in that secondary with Tre'Davious White, Jordan Poyer, and Micah Hyde. but it's nothing he can't overcome. He played a very sound 49ers defense last week and still got some very nice numbers as well. So they might be able to take away one of his star receivers, but we saw last week you certainly can't take away both of them. The Cardinals chose to take away Metcalf, and Lockett thrived. And then last week, the 49ers chose to take away Lockett, and Metcalf thrived. So there's just too many things the Seattle Seahawks do well. You can't stop them outright, and Russell Wilson is going to get those numbers in one way or another. He's a must-start quarterback, obviously. You can look to slow these guys down, but you can't stop them. Russell Wilson is going to get his numbers. He's got the highest floor for me this week in terms of quarterback play, along with the highest ceiling. So Russell Wilson is my quarterback 1 overall this week. Now let's move into my wide receiver rankings for Week 9. And my top 24 wide receivers are who we're going to be going over this week. And at number 24, in his return to NFL action, Antonio Brown makes my top 24 list. Call me crazy, but in his limited snaps, Antonio Brown is going to be involved. They're going to get him the football, and they're going to satisfy him with some touches early on, because if Antonio Brown is dissatisfied, he's taking Tampa's ship down with him. If Tony Toe Tap doesn't get his touches, he's going to let you hear about it, and that is the last thing the Bucs need right now. They do not need a noisy mouth in that locker room, and they need things to stay smooth. This is a talented football team, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers locker room needs to stay satisfied and level-headed. They cannot get emotional and let Antonio Brown ruin that group. So AB needs his touches. Tom Brady is going to throw him the football, and I honestly am predicting that Tom Brady is going to hit a deep ball over the top to Brown, which is what the Saints have been susceptible to all season long. They've given up deep balls to many wideouts this season, and AB is obviously a great route runner, so I think he can make things happen there. Antonio Brown, watch out. I think he's going to explode onto the scene early, and for that Tampa offense, he's going to put those guys over the top. I was really hesitant to put DJ Moore in my top 24 this week. The Kansas City Chiefs have been very under the radar this year. People don't realize how good they are against the pass and against the wide receiver. This Kansas City secondary is not playing games. They have locked up some really good wideouts. They play really good coverage, and they get after the quarterback. DJ Moore could honestly be a dud 100% this week. I know there's the argument that you're playing Pat Mahomes. This game could turn into a shootout, and the Panthers are going to have to throw the ball to keep up. This is true, but the Kansas City Chiefs are just doing such a good job at coverage that they're really not allowing big plays to opposing wideouts. I think DJ Moore honestly could have a very, very marginal game this week. I think his teammate Robby Anderson could as well. I'll get into him in my rankings a little bit later. But DJ Moore, be very cautious with him this week. He's not a guy I love starting, and I think there's plenty of other options for you. I would start him with extreme caution in Week 9. My wide receiver 22 this week is Jamison Crowder against the Pats, and hopefully he's able to return successfully from that hamstring injury, but he's got a somewhat formidable defense this week he's playing. Probably not quite as good as we're used to seeing the past 2 decades, but this Pats unit is still solid. They're not going to just give it to Crowder. So far this season, Jamison Crowder has been Sam Darnold's favorite target all year long when he's been available and on the field. I think that Crowder is definitely the type of player that burns the Pats out of the slot this week, but due to the somewhat difficult matchup of New England, I think Crowder is a little bit lower in my rankings than he normally would have been if this were a team like the Dolphins or a more average middle-of-the-pack team against the pass. Crowder still makes my top 24 for this week, though, because he's going to get his volume. He's going to get his looks from Sam Darnold because he is the most trusted option in that offense. I think that Jamison Crowder has the best chance of any Jets player to get in the end zone this week. At number 21, Chase Claypool is a guy with a great matchup this week. Not too much analysis needed for this game. I really like Chase Claypool's safe floor this week against the Cowboys. He has a very decent ceiling as well. Not quite as high as some other guys on his team, but Chase Claypool this week, I could very easily see him getting a score or two, and I think he's going to get a few looks as well. Look for a really solid performance out of Claypool this week, probably 5 to 6 catches, maybe 60 to 75 yards, and look for some scores as well out of Claypool. I talked about this a little bit earlier in the video, but if you missed it, Matthew Stafford has been placed on the Lions COVID reserve list. I think that might impact Marvin Jones this week in fantasy. He's a guy who is my wide receiver 20 for this week, but I think Marvin Jones might take a slight hit here. I prepped this video before the news came out, so maybe move him down a slot or two, but Marvin Jones against the Vikings throughout his career has been an absolute monster and terror for those guys. He's had some very elite fantasy performances against Minnesota at the height of that defense's performance during the Mike Zimmer era. Marvin Jones is a guy I really like this week, even without Matthew Stafford. Kenny Galladay's not going to be in the lineup, and that secondary for Minnesota is still not good. I think he gets a very nice workload this week, and I could see him having over 100 yards receiving. Marvin Jones, a very safe play in Week 9 with a solid ceiling as well. At wide receiver 19, we've got a guy this season who has certainly produced better than a wide receiver 19 for a Week 9 rankings list. But Robby Anderson, back to the Kansas City Chiefs discussion. All teams have struggled to throw the football on the Chiefs this year. We saw in Week 1, that defense just looks good. They shut down Deshaun Watson. They made things really difficult for them, and they've been really solid ever since from day one. Same thing with DJ Moore. I think Robby Anderson is going to get his looks, but the way they scheme things up in Kansas City is just really effective against the pass. They don't let you throw it on them, and I think Robby Anderson and DJ Moore are in for tough outings. So they're very low on my list this week in comparison to normal games, but they're definitely still guys who warrant starting consideration. They're just lower level wide receiver 2s for me this week. I'm a big Diontae Johnson guy this season, and he's my favorite Steelers wide receiver to start in Week 9 against the Cowboys. I think Diontae Johnson is the most risky guy in that Steelers offense as well, but against the Dallas defense, he's got a great chance to go over the top and get a couple scores. Diontae Johnson, an excellent route runner, a very, very vital part of that Steelers offense. He was fairly absent from the game plan last week and didn't show up in the stat sheets either. So Diontae Johnson is a guy who I think looks to get added into the game plan a little bit more this week against the Cowboys. It's been all or nothing for Johnson this season, and he's either really struggled to produce numbers or he's put up elite totals in the stat sheets. So I think this is a game where Diontae Johnson puts up those elite numbers and production. He's going to help a lot of teams win their weeks. And I think after Week 9 is all said and done, Diontae Johnson is going to be looked at as one of the top producers in fantasy this week. At wide receiver 17, A.J. Brown is lower than he would normally ever be for me in my rankings list. But due to the fact that he's either going to face shadow coverage from Kyle Fuller against the Bears this Sunday or see a healthy amount of coverage for him when he's lined up on that side of the field, I think A.J. Brown comes with some risk this week. In a game last week where I expected Brown to be highly productive and put up massive numbers against the Bengals, he actually struggled and was saved by a late touchdown that really put his value up a little bit. But had he not had that extra 6 points, he had a very ugly game. I think he only had 30-something yards receiving and 3 total catches. So A.J. Brown didn't have an impressive performance at all last week. And this week, I think he's got another strugglesome matchup. Obviously, you're still looking to start Brown this week, but he doesn't come with the same upside that's usually attached to him. At wide receiver 15 here, we've got Adam Thielen, and against the Lions, obviously a favorable matchup for him. And I think that moving forward on this list, we're going to start looking at guys who have better matchups and maybe some lesser talent than the guys who are more talented and have tougher matchups down at the bottom of this list. But Adam Thielen has been fantastic. At one point, I believe through 4 or 5 weeks, he was the wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy this season. He's fallen down a little bit due to tough matchups and outings in the past couple of weeks and as well as a bye week. So Adam Thielen, definitely a guy I like starting this week. I think he has higher upside than he's had in a few weeks now, and I think he's going to have somewhat of a bounce-back game, if you will, and put up some really solid numbers for your lineup. At wide receiver 14 this week, there's nothing not to like about Terry McLaurin against the Giants. Terry McLaurin has been excellent all season long. He's had really impressive performances in no real bust games where he's wrecked your lineup in a week. So Terry McLaurin needs to be started in all formats. He is borderline must-start territory the rest of the season due to how well he's produced this year. He's been excellent. There's no getting around it. Terry McLaurin is a very high-level fantasy producer, and he deserves to be considered for your lineup every single week. Due to his foot injury, Calvin Ridley is a high-end wide receiver 2 tier for me this week. He's been putting up wide receiver 1 numbers this year, but that injury I think is going to slow him down a little bit. And like I talked about earlier, the Broncos defense is pretty solid, even though their numbers against the pass aren't as impressive. I think Calvin Ridley still has a healthy fantasy performance this week, but you're not looking at the same upside that you would have against other opponents this year. Calvin Ridley is still going to go out there and get starting level numbers. He's just not going to go off and have 2 or 3 scores and over 100 yards this week. I would look for something more conservative, like 65 to 85 yards on 6 to 8 catches. and maybe a touchdown if he's lucky. My wide receiver 13 this week is Chris Godwin, the other Bucs wideout that I really like against New Orleans this week. Mike Evans has kind of fell out of the fantasy conversation for me at wideout for the Buccaneers. I know he played well against the Giants on Monday Night Football, but with AB coming into this offense and with the emergence of Gronk and Tom Brady's connection again, I think that there's too much to like with those other options. Chris Godwin is a staple in this offense. We know what his role is. Tom Brady likes those checkdowns. He likes those safety blankets underneath. And Chris Godwin is going to be one of the closest wide receivers to him when he lets go of the football. Chris Godwin's job in this offense is to catch the ball and run upfield, gets lots of yards after the catch. And Chris Godwin, his role is clear-cut, and we know what it's going to be. He's going to get his looks, he's going to get his numbers, and he's going to get those catches because he is a very good football player. You can depend on Chris Godwin going forward this fantasy season. Maybe his ceiling takes a step back because of the involvement of Antonio Brown and all the other moving pieces in that Tampa offense, but Chris Godwin is still a guy you can trust in your fantasy teams. We're into the low-end wide receiver 1 tier with my wide receiver 12 for Week 9, and that is Will Fuller against the Jags. I talked about how much I love Deshaun Watson against them this week, and I think Will Fuller, as the number 1 in that Texans offense, is going to get the majority of the benefit from that. Fuller's going to have a really healthy fantasy performance. I think he goes over 100 yards through the air and has a score as well. So Will Fuller, must-start territory for me this week. He's a wide receiver 1 in all formats, and you guys are starting him without question in your leagues. Justin Jefferson is my wide receiver 11 this week against the Lions. Justin Jefferson just has too many things to like about him, that size, that athleticism, that speed. He's going to go all over Detroit's secondary, and if they get into a shootout this week, I think it's a little bit less likely that they get into a shootout now that Matthew Stafford is not playing, but I think this game still has the potential to be high scoring. I think the Vikings will have to throw the football at some point, and I think Justin Jefferson is the main beneficiary from that as he is kind of taking over as Kirk Cousins' favorite wideout. But Justin Jefferson, I love him going forward. He's definitely a guy I like this week, and he's a low-end wide receiver 1 for me. Tyler Lockett, a little bit lower than he normally would be for me this week, and last week I put him lower on my list because I expected him to be shadowed by Jason Verrett last game, and that appeared to be the case. Tyler Lockett had a rather quiet fantasy performance, and DK Metcalf was the guy who thrived in that offense last week. And I think again this week, Tyler Lockett is going to face shadow coverage from Tre'Davious White. It's very possible that after that huge game, he could go over and cover DK Metcalf, but Tyler Lockett is the guy I expect to be shadowed by Tre'Davious White. I think Lockett's value will take a hit because of that, and I think he's going to see a lower ceiling as a result. So Tyler Lockett moves down a little bit on the list for me this week. Still a guy you got to start just because of the Russell Wilson to Lockett connection. If he gets in the end zone, his whole fantasy week can be saved. It's been 8 weeks since you've heard this name on the NFL field, and I haven't talked about him much here on the channel. Michael Thomas is a guy you can finally start in your lineups this week. It looks like he's going to play against Tampa Bay this week. And Michael Thomas and his return to action is my wide receiver 9 for Week 9. MT is going to rack up those targets, and he's going to rack up those receptions. I don't think he has a huge game against Tampa because of how good that defense is, but he's going to get his looks, and in PPR leagues, he's just going to haul in those catches. He has elite hands. He's going to get so many receptions that he's going to be fantasy relevant. I mean, if you're talking about a guy who had 12 to 13 catch games last year, in PPR leagues, that's plus 12 to 13 points just off his catches alone. So Michael Thomas clearly is a PPR monster. You're starting him regardless of your matchup in that league. In standard leagues even, I'm still starting MT this week. I think he's got a very nice connection with Drew Brees, obviously, after all these years and the production they've put up together. And then MT has been really solid with Drew Brees in the red zone in his career. So definitely a combo you trust. And this week, I think if they're able to finally hook back up on the field, it's a combination you want to take advantage of. Tyreek Hill is my wide receiver 8 for Week 9 this week. Pat Mahomes was a little bit lower on my list because of the matchup against Carolina, and I expect Diontae Jackson, the guy who has been getting some nice interception numbers this year, to be guarding Tyreek Hill for part of this game. I think Tyreek is still going to put up nice numbers. I think he might be able to slip through for one big catch, but ultimately, if Tyreek doesn't score this week, I think he might be held in check a little bit and put up some lower numbers than people are expecting in fantasy this week. A guy who's finally realizing his true fantasy potential this season is Allen Robinson. Since Nick Foles took over that offense, he is finally ascending into the spotlight and showing that he is a dominant wide receiver 1 in this league. Allen Robinson is a fantastic talent. He deserves all the targets he gets in that Chicago offense, and he really supports that offense when they need him. A-Rob was one of my favorite guys in draft season, and he is paying off right now for you guys if you picked him up. He is currently a top 10 wide receiver in PPR formats because he just gets peppered with targets. And A-Rob is a guy I love again this week against Tennessee, who has allowed a lot of big plays over the top. The secondary is the weakest unit of this defense, and I know they just added Desmond King, but I'm not sure if he's going to suit up and play this week after such a short turnaround. I think it might take him some time to get acclimated to that new system. Obviously, defense is defense, and the language is probably similar, but on such a short week, like I said, and the fact that this year we've got COVID and stuff to deal with, I don't know if he's going to be able to travel and play for a new team in 1 week. Regardless if King plays or not, though, he's a slot corner, and Allen Robinson only lines up in the slot some of the time. So when he's outside on Malcolm Butler and other boundary corners, I really like Robinson's matchup. I think he's going to score again this week. I think he has over 100 yards receiving. And I think in a highly contested football game with two really good teams, they're going to go back and forth. They're going to be going at it all game long. And I think Allen Robinson is going to shine in this matchup. DK Metcalf is the wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy right now, but he's my wide receiver 6 for week 9 against the Bills. This one is a bit of a similar situation to the Tyler Lockett move. I think that regardless of who DK Metcalf is lined up against across the other side of the field, he's going to still put up some numbers that are relevant to fantasy, but I think it depends on if he's shadowed by Tre'Davious White or if Lockett is. Because of the uncertainty of who is going to be guarding who this week, I moved both of them down a little bit in my rankings this week. I think ultimately it's going to be Lockett who sees that shadow coverage from White this week, but if it is Metcalf, he deserves to be taken down in the rankings a little bit because of how good of a player Tre'Davious White is. But I think both of these guys can certainly get their numbers against him as well. Arguably still the best wide receiver in the NFL, Julio Jones gets my wide receiver 5 spot this week against the Broncos. Denver is only the 24th ranked team against the wide receiver this year in fantasy football, so Julio, I think, is going to thrive this week. There's not really a true number 1 corner for Denver that can lock him down on that team. Obviously, the days of Aqib Talib and Chris Harris and that secondary are long gone. Those names are no longer there, and I think Julio Jones has a great opportunity to put up big numbers this week. And with Matt Ryan throwing him the ball, I think this is a matchup you definitely want to have on your side. At my wide receiver 4 spot this week, I've got DeAndre Hopkins. And I'll admit it, in draft season, I wasn't as high on DeAndre Hopkins as most were. I thought that with an offseason where we didn't really have a true training camp or preseason, the quarterback and wide receiver connection would just not really truly grow between Hopkins and Murray, but these two have been phenomenal, and Hopkins has honestly been better than advertised. I think that he's having his best season of his career and even outproducing those numbers he had with the Texans in his best stint there. So DeAndre Hopkins, I'm sorry if you guys are playing against him this week. He's going to put up ridiculous numbers against the Dolphins this week, and you do not want to be on the other side of that matchup. D-Hop is going to go off this week, and he's going to have a monster fantasy outing. A lot of fantasy experts and analysts this week have Davante Adams as their number 1 wide receiver for fantasy, but being the realist Packer fan that I am here, you can see I've got the logo on. I think Davante Adams is going to have a little bit of a lesser performance than people are expecting against the 49ers, and I think that's going to be a product of Aaron Rodgers struggling against this team. I talked about it earlier. Aaron just has not been good against San Fran in his career. And I think that obviously if your quarterback is struggling, you're not going to be able to get the football to your wideouts as effectively. So for that reason, Davante falls down my ranks a little bit. Still in the top 3, but not the top overall spot for Adams this week. A guy who consistently needs to be in the top of the fantasy ranks the rest of the season is Keenan Allen for the Chargers. Him and Justin Herbert are just so good together. Those guys just seemingly work perfect. He is so beneficial to Justin Herbert in his young career, and Keenan Allen is benefiting a lot from having Justin Herbert throwing him the football. So a very beneficial relationship for each other in that Chargers offense. And Keenan Allen just looks to be a monster the rest of the season. Las Vegas doesn't have anyone in that secondary that can shut Allen down. They don't have anyone who I think can even slow him down. So Allen this week is my wide receiver 2. A much better matchup than Adams has against the 49ers, and that's why he gets the nod here at the 2 spot. Keenan Allen is in for a big week. I think this pick here at my wide receiver 1 overall is going to shock a lot of people, like my Dalvin Cook pick did last week to finish as my number 1 overall running back. And that one came true. Cook had almost 50 points in PPR leagues. And Stefon Diggs here against the Seattle Seahawks has a great matchup. and a fantastic opportunity to put up week-winning numbers for your fantasy teams. Diggs is a home run hitter, and Josh Allen likes to throw him up and let Diggs run under it and catch it. And Seattle's secondary is not up to par with Stefon Diggs. They are not going to be able to cover him and hang with him down the field. I think they're going to start this game off trying to run the football a little bit, throw slants to Diggs, and set him up for that big play. And Stefon Diggs, who is a very good route runner, is probably going to run some sort of a double move or some sort of a stutter step route where he gets open over the top, and Josh Allen is going to let it fly, and Diggs is going to run under it multiple times and have multiple scores this week. I'm predicting it here. Hot take, I think Stefon Diggs has 2 touchdowns of 30-plus yards against Seattle this week. I think he's in for a monster day and his best outing of the season. Stefon Diggs has already wildly outproduced his expectations for this year and his draft capital you invested into him. I think that he continues his hot streak this week and proves why he deserved to be picked higher in fantasy leagues. That will wrap up my quarterback and wide receiver rankings for Week 9 fantasy football action. Thank you guys so much for watching and tuning into the channel, and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more fantasy football content the rest of this year. I really appreciate each and every single one of you guys, and I'll see you all next time. Peace out.